Behind him, Titus wore a sinister smile, convinced of his victory. In his mind, Raul's mistake was already fatal. At such close range, even if Raul blocked the mana blade, internal damage would be unavoidable. This, he believed, was the price of carelessness. But before Titus could reach him, Raul activated his psychokinesis. Titus's body froze in the air, halted as if crushed by an invisible force. Terror flashed across his face as overwhelming pressure wrapped around him. No matter how he struggled, his body refused to move. He could not comprehend what power had seized him. Raul turned fully to face him, his voice cold and steady. He condemned Titus for attempting a surprise attack during a sacred duel and calmly warned him that such audacity carried consequences. With a subtle motion, Raul intensified his psychokinesis and twisted Titus's leg. A sickening sound echoed as Titus screamed in agony and collapsed to the ground. Clutching his shattered limb, he cried out that he had been wrong and admitted defeat, his voice shaking with pain and fear. Raul drew his sword, his expression unforgiving. Admitting defeat now, he declared, was meaningless. For daring to defile a duel sanctioned by the Count's family, Titus would pay with his life. He raised his blade and brought it down as Titus shut his eyes in despair. At that instant, a blade intercepted Rose's strike. Viscount Jaden had stepped into the arena. His sword blocked Raul's attack, and in the same motion, he countered, forcing Raul backward despite his attempt to defend. The sudden intrusion sent a ripple of shock through the spectators. Zion exclaimed in alarm that someone had barged into the arena. Raul steadied himself and fixed his gaze on the newcomer, asking whether Viscount Jaden had truly decided to throw all caution aside. Jaden answered with furious scorn, accusing Raul of overstepping his place. To him, Raul was nothing more than a brat of the Count's family, not even a proper heir, daring to wield a sword and act as judge. The order of the domain, he claimed, had sunk to its lowest point. Right there and then, he vowed to prove who the rightful heir of the land truly was. Around them, both sides raised their weapons and moved into formation, the tension thick enough to suffocate. Raul smiled faintly and declared that this was perfect. There would be no need to go anywhere else to settle the matter. Raising his voice, he announced himself as Raul Ashton, Lord of Calip's castle, and proclaimed that he would now reveal every crime committed by the rebel leader, Viscount Jaden. The battlefield fell into stunned silence. Raul accused Jaden of conspiring with other nobles to overthrow Confrade Castle and of attempting to poison Count Melvin, the head of the Ashton family. For these crimes, he declared, Viscount Jaden and his accomplices stood charged with treason. A noble protested weakly, denying any talk of poisoning or conspiracy. Viscount Jaden himself roared in outrage, denouncing Raul's words as absurd nonsense spoken without proof. Who, he demanded, would believe the accusations of a mere child? Raul answered calmly that Jaden was a fool to the very end. Whether he admitted his crimes or not, the Count's family would hold him accountable. Jaden laughed bitterly and asked by what right the Count's family presumed to judge him. Raul corrected him. He was not the one who would pass judgment. At that moment, the gates opened, and a surge of blue mana flooded the area. Sensing the presence behind him, Viscount Jaden turned and froze in shock. Count Melvin had arrived. Raul declared that the true master of this land would be the one to judge him. Cold sweat streamed down Viscount Jaden's face as his confidence shattered. Count Melvin stepped forward and spoke with authority, introducing himself as Melvin Ashton, Lord of Confrade Castle. From that moment on, he announced he would personally settle all the sordid schemes carried out against his domain. The scene shifted to the Ashton estate before Viscount Jaden's arrival there. Raul entered his father's chamber, where Nakia stood beside the bed. She greeted him respectfully and confirmed that Count Melvin was showing signs of improvement. Leading Raul closer, she explained that all external treatments were complete and that the Manaphyria had been stabilized. With the mana collision halted, the Count's life was no longer in danger. Strangely, however, his mana was not moving, though no secondary complications had appeared. To Raul's surprise, his father awoke at that moment. Coughing weakly, Count Melvin said he had heard the news and praised Raul and Dylan for handling the situation wisely. Raul urged his father to focus solely on recovery and advancing to the next stage, telling him not to worry about the domain. But Melvin shook his head. He confessed that he had struck a wall he could never overcome, a limit unlike any hardship he had faced before. Each time he reached for it, it felt as though a god's voice told him this was as far as he could go. In his heart, Melvin lamented his failure. He had believed that the wall could one day be broken, that he could fulfill the family's long-cherished wish with his own hands. Now unable even to control his mana, he saw no choice but to pass his position on to his sons. Raul interrupted him with a single question. Was he truly going to give up? The question left Melvin speechless. Raul pressed on, asking whether the swordmaster and lord of the Count's domain would abandon everything right there and then. He refused to accept it. That defeated expression, he said, was not the face the head of the Count's family should wear. Raul declared his faith in his father's strength and vowed that he would make it happen, that his father would overcome the wall and rise once more. The room trembled as Raul spoke to his father, explaining the truth behind his immobile mana. The only reason your mana isn't moving, he said firmly, is because those cowards used poison. You can't despair simply because scoundrels tried to deceive you. You're not an empty shell. Your power remains intact. Count Melvin laughed softly at his son's words, a mix of relief and pride shining in his eyes. You're right, son, he admitted, his voice steady. Absolutely right. The change in his mood caught Raul by surprise, a brief light piercing the weight of tension around them. Melvin's expression hardened as he reflected on himself. I've shown you a pathetic side of myself, he confessed. This isn't who I truly am. I had almost forgotten that my life had been forged through endless challenges and effort. That's what made me an outstanding swordsman and head of the House of Ashton. Is this as far as I go? My destiny? If this is the will of a god, I'll break it no matter what. Blue mana began to radiate from him as he focused on regaining control. Nikia's voice cut through the aura of power, alarmed. No, Count, you can't. If you force your mana like that, a backflow could occur. Your mana road might rupture. Raul quickly stopped her, shaking his head. Everyone has something more important than their own life. He said right now, Father wants to reclaim his. Nikia set up a barrier immediately to seal this area from the outside. Yes, Nikia replied, moving to follow his command. Raul then summoned his forest fairy Ravel. Can you help me? He asked, and she responded without hesitation. Of course. Stabilize the mana here. Raul instructed. And cast support magic on my father. Ravel moved immediately to follow his order, her magic weaving into the room while Nikia reinforced the protective barrier. Meanwhile, Raul called forth the spirit of Karl sealed within his Regnator armor. Observing the Count's condition, Karl spoke with grave certainty. As I suspected, something is suppressing the Count's mana haul. That explains the imbalance between his mana capacity, his level, and his physical condition. Raul's voice was sharp. Is there a way to fix it? Karl shook his head. This isn't about his skill or will. Something external doesn't want him to advance to the next stage. A being with power rivaling a god seems to have intervened. Count Melvin struggled, his body showing signs of strain as he tried to control his surging mana. Nikia warned, her voice urgent. Raul, it's the initial symptoms of a backflow. At this rate, it's extremely dangerous. Raul stepped closer, his eyes locked on his father. Father, he said with determination, that wall blocking your path is a curse. I know you would never yield to it, and one day you would overcome it yourself. But the world will not leave us alone, and the House of Ashton needs your strength now. Don't refuse my request this time. I will help you shatter that detestable wall and fight alongside us. Without hesitation, Raul sent the guild invitation through the system to his father. The world seemed to freeze as several red warning windows appeared around him. Each flashing dire message, error, force scenario warnings, and calculations predicting catastrophic outcomes if Raul's actions continued. The system cautioned that releasing Count Melvin's binding force could extinguish thousands of related quests and drastically diminish Raul's influence in the House of Ashton. But Raul ignored the warnings. Screw that, he muttered, sending the guild invite to his father. Time resumed, and Melvin accepted the membership. The Count's manner erupted violently, thrumming through the room like a storm. Karl's voice rang out urgently. Get everyone away from the Count. Raul reacted instantly. He grabbed Ravel and carried Nikia to safety as the mana surged around the Count. Philip, stationed as guard, was equally stunned by the sheer power radiating through the room. Raul checked with Nikia. How's the barrier? I've centered it in the room, she replied. It's a little unstable, but the effects won't reach outside the mansion. Ravel reassured Raul. Leave the mansion's barrier to me. I can control it just fine. Raul clenched his fist tightly, his mind focused on the warning windows he had seen moments before. With a mutter, he made a vow to himself. I'm done living a life where I'm dragged along by a script someone else wrote. From now on, I'll write all my own scenarios. The Count's manner roared around him, but with the support of his allies and his own indomitable will, Melvin de Ashton began reclaiming control. A storm of blue light illuminated the room as father and son prepared to face the trials ahead together. The room bore the scars of raw power. Shattered windows and splintered furniture testified to the intensity of Count Melvin's uncontrolled mana. Yet now, seated on his bed, the Count had regained command over his energy. Raul stepped forward, concern etching his features. "Father, are you okay?" he asked, feeling the lingering weight of his father's immense mana. Count Melvin's expression softened as he looked at his son. "At last," he said, voice tinged with both relief and triumph. "I have done it. The long-awaited wish of our family, something I could never fulfill. But now, the day has finally come when I accomplish it with my own hands. Raul, it's all thanks to you." Raul's lips curved into a proud smile. "Congratulations on reaching the realm. You worked so hard, father." Nikia's eyes widened, unable to fully comprehend what she was witnessing. And even Philip joined in, bowing slightly. "Congratulations, my lord." "Count," he said, voice filled with awe. As Raul and the servants gathered around, Count Melvin reflected inwardly, thinking I had to surpass the realm by my own strength. It was only stubborn pride. I thought I was alone, but I wasn't. I have people to protect, loyal subordinates, and a family I love. Raul, I owe this boy yet another debt. Suddenly, a red warning window appeared before Raul, flashing urgent messages. It declared that the main scenario NPC, Count Melvin de Ashton, had resisted compulsion and joined the First Guild, triggering errors in the fourth scenario, the fall of House Ashton. The system warned that misfortune might strike at any time, and the failure to follow protocol could jeopardize thousands of related quests. Raul read it carefully, pondering the term karma for the first time. Players meddling with a mandatory scenario is nearly impossible. He thought NPCs acted as if guided by divine instructions. My existence. I must be a variable. What kind of obstacle will this create? Before Raul could dwell further, Count Melvin attempted to rise. Nikia quickly intervened. "You must not move yet. You've just reached the realm. The pain will be intense." Raul added, voice steady. "Father, you don't need to push yourself. My brother and I can handle this matter ourselves." Count Melvin smiled gently and patted Raul on the head. "I'm sorry for making you worry," he said. "And thank you. You've done well all this time. You must have suffered from having such a lacking father. I want you to stay by my side and witness the end of this matter. Will you allow that?" Raul's thoughts flickered. "I don't know how this karma will affect me, but it's worth accepting. I won't regret it." "Of course, father," he replied firmly. With that, Count Melvin moved toward Viscount Jaden, his mana radiating powerfully around him. Viscount Jaden, eyes narrowing, sneered. "I heard your condition had worsened. You were on the brink of death, yet you look perfectly fine. Were you deceiving the Count's family?" Melvin's gaze hardened. "You are still the same with that shamelessness. I heard you were living comfortably in another nation. What drove you to this point?" Anger contorted Jaden's face as he bared his teeth. "Wipe that pitiful look off your face. You've forgotten. Everything you have, I conceded to you. And yet you repay that with ingratitude and blame me. Are you out of your mind?" Melvin's command cut through the tension. "Come into the arena." Walked Nikia, Bishop Alonso of the Xenon Order, and 6th Circle Mage Carissa of the Mage Association. The bishop spoke first. According to the Xenon Order and the Mage Association, the Count's collapse was not an accident. It was a clear assassination attempt, Nikia added gravely. "These are the findings we obtained while treating the Count. He is suffering from an illness called manifilaria, a method commonly used within the Empire." Raul's voice thundered. "Drag them in." The servants were forced forward, trembling under the weight of Raul's authority. "We have secured not only evidence, but witnesses, accomplices, and the mastermind," he declared, joining multiple swords and pointing at the culprits. "Now then, speak clearly. What did you do?" One servant quavered. "We only followed orders. We were told to mix a measured amount of the drug into the Count's food." Raul pressed further. "Who gave the order?" "Viscount Jaden," the servant admitted. Viscount Jaden's lips curved into a sinister smile. "I see now," he said. "So this was your scheme, my dear brother. To rid me completely, the one who threatened you. You deceived everyone, even used me. I will never forgive you, Melvin." He leapt into the air, swinging his mana sword at Melvin, who blocked effortlessly. Jaden activated his tattoo and spat venomous word. "Yes, those eyes, that expression, that attitude, looking down on everyone as if you were the best. Decades have passed, yet I have never forgotten. Everything you took as if natural was originally mine. If not for you, it would all have been mine." Melvin's patience snapped. "I can't listen to this any longer. This is where I stop treating you as my elder brother. Viscount Jaden, I charge you with treason for disrupting the Count's domain." Jaden shouted. "Don't be ridiculous. Who are you to dare?" His words cut off abruptly as he felt Melvin's overwhelming mana. What is this? This pressure is so strong I can barely breathe. Melvin swung his mana sword and Jaden managed to block, but his arm trembled uncontrollably. No way. This level is the realm of a high master, he thought in shock. With a roar, Melvin leapt into the air again. His attack exploded into a storm of mana, shaking the ground and filling the arena with raw, unbridled power. As the dust settled, the aftermath of Count Melvin's attack became clear. Deep scars marred the ground, evidence of the devastating force unleashed. Viscount Jaden had managed to block the strike with his sword, but the impact drove him several feet backward. Blood spilled from his mouth as he coughed violently and collapsed to his knees. Viscount Jaden realized something was terribly wrong. Count Melvin had reached the high master level, far beyond what had been expected. Desperation took hold as Jaden resolved not to let the battle end this way. He reflected on all he had endured to reach this point, then roared in fury and swung his sword, releasing a mana slash toward the Count. Count Melvin calmly focused his mana into his blade and cleaved through the incoming attack. Without hesitation, he followed up with a punch. Viscount Jaden raised his sword to block, but the blow struck the blade directly, cracking it apart. In an instant the sword shattered. Viscount Jaden stiffened, finally growing truly serious. But before he could react, Count Melvin's fist slammed into his face. The sheer force hurled the Viscount backward. He clutched his face, overwhelmed by the pain. Count Melvin declared that he had been far too lenient in the past. Because of his misguided judgment, too many had suffered, and now the cursed feud had to end once and for all. Viscount Jaden burst into laughter and mocked Melvin's words. He accused the Count of being blinded by his own sense of justice, unable to see the rot beneath his feet, and thus unfit to rule the castle. He claimed that countless people lived in fear beneath Melvin's authority, waiting for the chance to strike. He warned that the brighter the light, the darker the shadow, and that Melvin would one day be devoured by those shadows. Before he could say anything more, Count Melvin swung his sword and severed Viscount Jaden's head. At the sight, Viscount Jaden's son, Titus, and the Viscount's knights were struck with terror. Count Melvin calmly answered the Viscount's final provocation, declaring that he would not fall to exhaustion from such threats. He proclaimed himself as Melvin de Ashton, Lord of Confort Castle, and vowed to protect the land for the rest of his life. Hearing this, the Count's knights erupted into unified cheers, celebrating their lord's victory. Watching from afar, Raul realized that House Ashton had been completely saved from its destined downfall. Soon after, Dylan, Raul's older brother, kicked open the castle doors. The butler shouted an alarm about an intruder, only for Dylan to scoff and demand to know who was in charge. He ordered the person responsible to be brought to him immediately, asserting his authority without hesitation. The butler quickly complied. Dylan then issued commands to his knights, ordering all castle gates sealed and instructing the domain's nobles to remain in their homes. He dispatched squads to secure the lord's residence and the barracks, setting the entire castle into motion. In the aftermath of the civil war and Viscount Jaden's purge, the Count's family was overwhelmed with restoring order. While the family dealt with internal chaos, the Count's representative, Dylan, had traveled beyond the territory, reclaiming lands from lords who had supported the Viscount. At the same time, Raul had been occupied, rooting out traitors within the domain on behalf of his father. Knights from the First Guild began arresting nobles across the territory, with Jake and Philip overseeing the operation. Jake remarked on the sheer number of traitors uncovered, while Philip noted that Count Melvin's earlier inaction had allowed resentment to fester. Though concerned about arresting so many high-ranking nobles, Jake was reassured that the Count himself would deliver the final verdict. Reviewing the reports, Raul noted with satisfaction that even figures his father and the elders had struggled to confront. Powerful merchant brokers and association executives draining the territory had all been captured. This was the only moment when such a purge was possible. Every route of rebellion needed to be torn out to prevent future uprisings. With this done, Raul intended to leave House Ashton in the hands of his brother and father. Recognizing this as a necessary step shaped by altered scenarios and hard-earned gains, a system window appeared, confirming the completion of the Karma Quest, Baron Union Encirclement, and the alternate scenario, The Traitor's End. A hidden scenario titled The New Heir of House Ashton was unlocked. As a result, Raul dismissed the notion of becoming the new heir and instead turned his attention to the rewards. Among them was an item called the Absolute Stat Boost Pill, an S-grade item that permanently increased the chosen stat by 1 point, scaling further with the user's absolute stat. Raul immediately recognized its value. Unlike normal growth, which slowed dramatically and capped at 100, This pill ignored all limits and pushed stats beyond their natural ceiling. His status window updated, displaying his name level, now reaching 99 in hardcore mode. Class as a high-tier Knight of Sword expert with intermediate telekinetic abilities and affiliations with Ashton County, the Royal Baron household, and the First Guild. His stats had risen across the board, and his unique traits included Skill Collector, Developer's Analysis Eye, Telekinesis Meister, Noble Swordsmanship Lineage, and one unknown trait. A second notification declared him the first player to reach level 99, awarding him the special title Pioneer. Satisfied, Raul rose from his seat, confident that it was time to move on to the next stage. The scene then shifted to Free City Mirror inside the First Guild's branch and its purple special training hall. Two figures were locked in combat, Wang Tianming and Kim Ilwoo. Wang Tianming swung his sword, releasing a mana technique known as Meiwa Noang, the Plum Blossom Roadside. The strike detonated in a burst of mana upon impact. As the dust cleared, Wang Tianming stared in shock. Kim Ilwoo was still standing completely unharmed. Kim Ilwoo raised his dagger, smiled calmly, and signaled that the exchange was over and that it was now his turn. As Kim Ilwoo rushed forward to attack, Wang Tianming swung his sword once more, releasing 2 mana slashes toward him while announcing the technique as Plum Blossom Butterfly Dance. Kim Ilwoo would dodge both strikes with ease and remarked that Tianming should stop giving unnecessary names to his techniques and shouting them out while attacking. He questioned why someone would announce a powerful move before using it. Wang Tianming replied that it was a sacred ritual and claimed that an ordinary person could never understand a warrior's struggle. Kim Ilwoo let out a quiet sigh, thinking that although Tianming's skills were impressive, he became an entirely different person the moment he picked up a sword. While the two continued sparring, they were observed by others nearby. One of them was Blake, a flashy fighter from the United States, who commented that it was hard to tell whether Tianming's behavior was individuality or simple stubbornness. The other observer was Han Seo-hyun from Korea, a mythical beast summoner. She remarked that if something interfered with combat, it should be called stubbornness. At that moment, Kim Ilwoo activated his technique, creating several figures identical to himself. Seeing this, Wang Tianming accused him of being a coward for using a secret technique again. Kim Ilwoo smiled and calmly pointed out that Tianming had used his special ability as well, noting that it was not particularly underhanded. Watching the exchange, Blake commented that everyone's skills had clearly improved since graduating from the academy. He admitted that at first, he had wondered what they were even doing back then. Han Seo-hyun replied that all of their growth was thanks to that person. Blake asked if she meant DoHyun, adding that they had not seen him in a while. Han Seo-hyun confirmed it, explaining that she had heard DoHyun was away for his second job advancement. Nearly 2 weeks had passed without any news, and it was impossible to know where he was or what he was doing. The scene then shifted to the past to the First Guild Academy's graduation ceremony. On the stage, an announcer declared the conclusion of the first graduation ceremony, wishing the graduates the Lord's blessings and glory in their future endeavors. The cadets erupted in celebration. 5 months after the open beta service began, the cadets who had trained for 3 months at the academy completed their graduation ceremony, looking completely different from when they had first enrolled. Proving their growth, every graduate achieved the remarkable feat of ranking within the top 1,000. Guild scouts flooded in to recruit them, and their futures looked bright. However, the greatest source of frustration for many was the Purple Guild, a new player guild led by the rank 1 player Bae DoHyun. Entry into the Purple Guild was highly exclusive, limited only to top-ranking cadets, and even among them, only a select few received recruitment offers. At that time, Dalton summoned Han Seo-hyun, Kim Ilwoo, Wang Tianming, and Blake to his office to present them with recruitment offers from the Purple Guild. Kim Ilwoo asked if the offer was meant for all of them. Dalton smiled and confirmed that it was, adding that it was an offer too good to refuse and asking for their thoughts. Han Seo-hyun commented that it was an incredibly generous offer, but wondered whether it was acceptable to join without permission from the guild founder, Bae DoHyun. Dalton assured her that there was no need to worry, explaining that recruiting them was DoHyun's intention. He then turned to Kim Ilwoo and revealed an additional proposal. DoHyun wanted Kim Ilwoo to become the vice guild master. The revelation shocked everyone present. Kim Ilwoo asked if Dalton was serious about entrusting him with such an important position. Dalton told him not to be modest, stating that Kim Ilwoo's skills were second only to DoHyun's as the Academy's salutatorian. More importantly, he emphasized the deep trust DoHyun had in him. That alone was reason enough, and with the Purple Guild's benefits and First Guild backing, it would greatly support their future growth. Dalton concluded by asking them to accept the offer. The scene returned to the present as Wang Tianming was pushed backward by Kim Il-woo's attack. He stabbed his sword into the ground to stop himself. Kim Il-woo stepped forward and extended his hand, warning that if Tianming continued like this, he would not be able to defeat DoHyun or even him. When Tianming grabbed his hand and stood up, replying that they would see if Kim Il-woo could still say that once his martial arts were perfected. As the sparring ended, Han Seo-hyun and Blake approached them. Han Seo-hyun remarked that Kim Il-woo's growth was amazing, noting how freely he was already using clones. Blake added that this was exactly what one would expect from the Vice Guild Master and asked how much stronger Kim Il-woo planned to become. Kim Il-woo replied that DoHyun had once told him not to confine himself within the framework of skills. By embodying and applying skills directly, his growth rate had become incredible. Han Seo-hyun then asked if Kim Il-woo had heard anything from DoHyun lately, mentioning that the two were quite close. Kim Il-woo answered that there was still no news and that it seemed to be taking longer than usual this time. At that moment, a system announcement screen appeared before them. It declared that player DoHyun had completed his second job advancement. Due to the emergence of a second job advancement holder, a graduation tower had appeared in each free city. The tower offered test courses for both combat and non-combat classes. Once a graduate emerged from even one class, the free city movement restriction would be lifted, granting access to the main quest. The announcement also warned of cooldown penalties for failure and recommended a minimum challenge level of 50 after completing the second job advancement. Seeing the message, Han Seo-hyun expressed her amazement that DoHyun had actually succeeded. Blake admitted that he had to acknowledge it. Wang Tianming, however, grew serious and began walking away. Kim Il-woo would turn to him and ask where he was going. Wang Tianming replied that he was going to level up and obtain his job advancement, stating that he could not afford to fall behind DoHyun. Surprised, Kim Il-woo immediately sprinted after him, suggesting they go together. The scene shifted to Mirror Square, where the streets were crowded with players. One player exclaimed in surprise to his companion that there was no place without the First Guild's mark. His companion replied that most of the stores were operated by the First Guild. Mira was a massive city with a population exceeding 100,000 and a constant influx of players. Thanks to Raul's long-term development efforts, the city was filled with player-friendly facilities, restaurants tailored to player tastes, potion shops, byproduct purchasing offices, and stylish clothing stores. Although most contribution points belonged to the First Guild, players felt no resentment. With welfare far superior to other regions, player satisfaction in Free City Mira was extremely high, and reviews were overwhelmingly positive. Naturally, attention gravitated toward the graduation tower that had appeared in this central hub. Sometime later, an injured party emerged from the tower. Watching them stagger out, a brown-haired player commented that several days had passed and no one had conquered the tower yet. A blue-haired companion replied that they wanted to go somewhere other than Mira, mentioning the Hesse Guild, which had seemed confident but apparently failed. He remarked that in the end, only one person remained, connected undisputed number 1, Bae DoHyun. However, despite completing his second job advancement, there had been no news. The brown-haired player suggested that DoHyun might be deliberately taking his time, so that he would stand out even more by appearing after everyone else failed. The blue-haired player became irritated, snapping that DoHyun was not that kind of person and that something must have happened. At that moment, a man sitting nearby coughed. Both players turned toward him in confusion. The blue-haired player's companion put an arm around him, and the two walked away while the brown-haired player continued talking, suggesting they focus on their own job advancements instead of worrying about someone who was not present. Once they left, the seated man removed his hoodie, revealing himself to be Raul, disguised as Bae DoHyun through shapeshifting. He muttered that he had not expected even his observation to be detected. Having engaged the atmosphere, he decided it was finally time to make his entrance, just as desired. As Raul walked through the streets, players who noticed him stopped in surprise. One of them wondered aloud if that person could really be him. His companion answered in disbelief that it was Bae DoHyun. Soon, players began shouting excitedly, asking him to look their way even once and declaring themselves as fans. Raul waved casually in response. At that moment, his forest fairy companion Ravel emerged and remarked that it must be nice to be so popular. Raul asked if that was meant as a compliment, and Ravel confirmed it with a teasing tone before shifting to a more serious concern. She questioned whether it was truly fine to leave the Calip's territory unattended, warning that any remaining troops could still spark a territorial war. Raul smiled calmly and replied that there was no need to worry about that place at all. Ravel commented that his attitude was unusually carefree, to which Raul responded that it was simply because he was confident everything would turn out fine. The scene then shifted to the Reuben Royal Palace, where Gerald D. Reuben sat upon the throne. In a thunderous voice, he ordered the knights to bring before him the lords who had deployed troops to Calops. Several noble lords were dragged in and forced to kneel. Gerald questioned whether they were the ringleaders who had attempted to wage a territorial war without royal permission. One lord hastily claimed there had been a misunderstanding, insisting that they had been threatened by Viscount Jaden. Gerald clenched his teeth in anger and accused them of fearing a foreign power that had defected to another nation more than the royal family of Reuben. He ordered all of them imprisoned, declaring that the matter would be thoroughly investigated and punished accordingly. As the lords were dragged away, they pleaded desperately for mercy. Gerald then addressed everyone present, declaring that Calops was a territory he had personally granted to Sir Raul in recognition of his tremendous contributions. He emphasized that Raul was a benefactor of the nation and a precious friend, and that attacking him was equivalent to turning one's back on the crown itself. He warned them all to understand how grave such an act truly was. The scene shifted again to the graduation tower, where Raul entered the structure. He remarked that it had been a long time since he had last been there. Ravel recalled that he had once passed through the tower before, and Raul agreed, noting that it seemed largely unchanged. Ravel observed that the tower was an incredibly elaborate fusion of fantasy magic and spatial magic, admitting that even she would struggle to fully comprehend it. At that moment, a system window appeared, welcoming Raul to the graduation tower and informing him that he could test the skills he had honed in Connect. As the system scanned him, it requested a brief moment to measure his status. Another system window appeared, displaying a recommended test list that included close combat, ranged combat, telekinesis, magic, summoning, reconnaissance, assassination, crafting, and more. Seeing the long list, Ravel exclaimed in surprise, speculating that it was due to Raul's vast collection of skills. Raul explained that an individual could challenge up to 3 tests and decided that telekinesis would be his first choice. Ravel reminded him that there was something he absolutely needed to obtain this time. And Raul admitted that although he was not thrilled about it, he had no choice. After a brief pause, Ravel suggested that Raul did not need her help for now and told him to call her when he needed her later. Raul chuckled, told her to take a break, and turned his attention toward his first opponent. A status window appeared, displaying details of the test. The objective was to defeat the telekinesis instructor of the graduation tower with the additional condition of using only telekinesis skills. Both Raul and the instructor were restricted to level 50 with intermediate-level skill proficiency. The rewards included an exclusive Grade A equipment box, a Grade A title, experience points, 50,000 coins, and an exclusive skill enhancement. Seeing the rewards, Raul reflected that they were incredible. In his past life, he had never been able to obtain such prizes. But this life was different. With that thought, he created several swords using his psychokinesis trait. Before long, Raul seized his opponent by the neck with telekinesis and lifted him into the air. The instructor coughed in disbelief, muttering that it was impossible. Before disappearing, the instructor congratulated Raul and wished blessings upon his path, marking the successful completion of the first telekinesis test. The second test was close combat. Raul faced a red-haired sword master of the graduation tower and, after exchanging several sword strikes, defeated him with ease, passing the second test as well. Spirit Carl, clad in Regnitor armor and Raul's sword instructor, praised Raul, stating that his skills had improved greatly. Raul credited his master and asked how he was finding the new environment. Carl replied that there was nothing particularly uncomfortable, explaining Regnitor's stealthy predation function, which allowed it to absorb lower-tier power armor to mimic their abilities. By concealing Regnitor's appearance through internal armor consumption, he had successfully disguised himself as Bae DoHyun, even fooling the instructors. A system window then appeared, asking Raul to select a course for the final third test. Raul chose magic and declared his intention to face the magic instructor of the graduation tower. Upon hearing this, Ravel appeared enthusiastically, announcing that it was finally her turn and proclaiming herself as Ravelina Elliot Mare Diane, heir to the fairy folk. Raul stopped her mid-sentence and confessed his long-held dream of becoming an all-master capable of using every skill. He asked her for just one chance to pursue that dream. Ravel was shocked but ultimately created a staff for him and instructed him to try casting a basic fire spell. Raul attempted to form a fireball, but the spell dissipated before it could be launched, and the staff shattered. Raul questioned whether the staff was the problem, but Ravel reminded him that a true craftsman does not blame their tools. She expressed disbelief that someone so skilled with swords and telekinesis could be utterly incompetent with a staff. Raul argued that the mechanisms behind swords and telekinesis were fundamentally different. Ravel bluntly stated that Raul lacked even the slightest talent for magic and urged him to abandon the reckless idea of mastering it. Raul admitted that he had dreamed of becoming an all-master. But as Ravel glared at him, he nervously wondered if it was time to give up on that dream. At that moment, the third test opponent appeared. A mage who greeted Raul and asked if they should begin the test. Ravel grew excited, declaring that she could no longer stand watching from the sidelines. She flew toward the mage, eager to finally show off her skills after such a long time. Seeing Ravel, the mage immediately began casting a spell, chanting for the floating mana of flames to answer his call, and pierced through his enemy. In response, several fire spears formed in the air and shot toward her. Ravel reacted instantly, casting an elemental shield to block the incoming attack. As the fire spears struck the shield, a massive explosion erupted. Despite the blast, Ravel remained unharmed, protected by her magic. Without hesitation, she counterattacked, casting a chain lightning spell and directing it at the mage. Startled, the mage quickly summoned a stone wall to intercept the attack. Watching the battle from a distance, Raul was left in awe. Their spellcasting speed was so fast that his mind could barely keep up. The exchange was far more intense than he had expected. Ravel then cast two spells in quick succession, an explosive firebomb and a windstorm, and fused them. The combined magic transformed into a raging firestorm that surged toward the mage. He had no answer for it. The attack struck him head-on, overwhelming his defenses and defeating him. Acknowledging his loss, the mage spoke with solemn respect. He admitted that she had surpassed all the spells he had memorized and recognized her, the owner of the grimoire, as a true mage. Ravel smiled quietly at his words. Raul thanked her, expressing his gratitude for fighting in his place. Ravel brushed it off lightly, saying it was nothing. Turning his attention to the system window, Raul prepared to check the result. The window displayed a message congratulating him on successfully passing the graduation exam and asked whether he wished to graduate from the starting city and take on the challenge of the Real Connect world. Raul selected yes. A beam of light shot into the sky, and fireworks erupted around the tower as the system announced the achievement. Nearby players stared in shock at the spectacle. Inside, Raul muttered to himself that the real game was finally beginning. At that moment, another system window appeared before him. It announced that the player behind had become the first to pass the graduation tower test. He had proven that players once strangers were now qualified to become saviors of the Connect world. From that moment on, free city movement restrictions were lifted, allowing exploration of the entire Connect continent. However, players would no longer be protected outside designated areas. The main quest, Appearance of the Savior, had officially begun, and players were instructed to explore the continent and accumulate contribution points for its residents. The scene then shifted outside the game to Seoul, South Korea. Several individuals were gathered in what appeared to be a high-level meeting. Most participants appeared as holograms while only one man sat there in person. One of the holograms belonged to Seokyeon Jong, the current Prime Minister of South Korea. He explained that abnormal situations were emerging across multiple countries, including South Korea. While it might be premature to conclude, signs predicted by that person were appearing worldwide. The man seated in person was Sang Yong-han, chairman of the Daesung Group. He noted that he had heard similar concerns were being raised in the United States and China and asked whether the VIP had made any statement. A young man questioned whether it was too early for the government to take direct action. A middle-aged man sighed, arguing that other countries had likely already begun moving and that they were falling behind. The young man sharply warned him to watch his words, reminding him that this was not a place for complaints. Unfazed, the middle-aged man insisted he was only stating the obvious and emphasized the urgency of finding solutions. At that moment, Dae Kim, the half-bald Minister of Science and Technology, intervened and asked everyone to calm down. He summarized the situation, explaining that since Connect officially launched, the predictions made by that person were becoming reality. Recent data showed exponential increases in global temperatures, abnormal weather patterns, and changes in sunspot sizes. While global warming was a known issue, the current rate of change far exceeded predicted models, especially over the past 6 months since Connect's launch. Seokyeon Jong explained that this was precisely why the meeting had been convened. Even the slightest possibility could not be ignored. For the sake of the nation, he requested the private sector's cooperation until the government decided on further action. After a brief silence, Sang Yong-han agreed, stating that cost concerns were irrelevant under such circumstances. However, he hoped the next meeting would produce more practical and constructive agreement. The Prime Minister thanked everyone for their cooperation and emphasized the importance of sharing new information as major changes continued to unfold within Connect. With that, the meeting concluded. The holograms vanished, leaving Sang Yong-han alone. His expression hardened as he called someone into the room. His eldest son, Sean Woo-han, entered and commented that none of the attendees seemed truly certain and that they all appeared to be hiding something. Sang Yong replied that it was only natural, as they themselves had not revealed everything. He asked his son what they should do next. Sean Woo-han suggested gathering people and having them join Connect, stating that it would be a crucial move going forward and a major opportunity for the company. Sang Yong considered his son's words, thinking that his boldness likely came from youth, but acknowledging that he was not wrong. He then called for Secretary Lee. Lee responded immediately. Sang Yong instructed him to post a recruitment notice and form a support team, promising to provide as many capsules as necessary and to deploy more personnel as additional capsules became available. Lee acknowledged the order. Turning back to his son, Sang Yong reminded him that he hated losing. Sean Woo-han confirmed he understood. Sang Yong stated that if that person's words were true, connection would become the key to their future. He warned his son not to tarnish the name of the Daesung Group. Sometime later, the scene returned to Connect inside the first guild building. Raul reviewed his reward items one by one. When he reached the final item, he asked if it was the last one. Raul confirmed that it was. Raul sighed, complaining that most of the graduation tower rewards were nothing but useless junk. He wondered when he would ever clean it all up as he looked over piles of swords, daggers, gold coins, and miscellaneous items. Hoping for something worthwhile, he opened the final box. As it opened, a brilliant light spilled out. Ravel noted that the effect was different from before. From the light emerged a necklace. Raul immediately checked its details. Its name was Song of Three Souls. The item was of unique rarity and S grade. Its effects included a 50% increase in spirit power recovery speed. Its special effect allowed it to store 3 telekinetic abilities in advance for later use. The description explained that it was crafted from fragments of ancient telekinetic souls, whose guidance enhanced spirit power recovery and allowed stored abilities to activate automatically or under preset conditions. Reading the description, Raul realized it was a dream item for telekinetic. The options were perfect for him, allowing him to store finishing moves or evasive techniques as insurance. He continued muttering to himself while staring at the necklace. Ravel coughed lightly, clearly flustered, and asked how long he planned to stare at it. Raul turned to her, realizing he had kept her waiting. He quickly agreed and said it was time to move on. The most important reward remained. Opening the system window, he read the next message. It displayed a quest achievement for defeating the instructor and announced an additional reward, skill effect enhancement. He was prompted to select one option. With quiet determination, Raul declared that it was finally time to fulfill his long-cherished wish. Multiple system windows appeared before Raul. One window displayed the information on the Infinity Sword's efficiency growth. The second showed infinite sword speed growth. The third displayed melee weapon proficiency increase. The fourth showed telekinetic power growth. The fifth displayed magic casting speed growth. Raul examined the options and realized that these choices could enhance various skill effects in the telekinesis, close combat, and magic fields he had been developing. All of them were useful, but he knew there was something Fair Ravel wanted most. He continued scrolling through the windows and soon found another system window. It displayed the information on the Magic Item Skill Collection seal release. The sealed Magic Item Skill Collection was partially unsealed and bound to player Bae DoHyun and Dalton. Upon seeing it, Ravel became visibly surprised. She exclaimed that she had found it, then turned to Raul and reminded him that she had told him it would appear as an option. Raul acknowledged her, remarking that she truly was an internet expert. Without hesitation, he selected the option to release the skill collection seal. Immediately, letters written in an unfamiliar language began revolving around Ravel. The surrounding mana gathered, aligned, and flowed directly into her body. After some time, the letters faded away, and Ravel absorbed all the mana completely. She let out a satisfied chuckle. Another system window appeared before Raul. Skill Collection Grade Epic Status Sealed. March 5th Bound Librarian Revel residing within effect enhances the effectiveness of skills based on the types and number of skills recorded. Current total recorded skills, 1573. Additional function skill book creation. It allowed the creation of skill books from recorded skills and also allowed newly learned skills to be recorded. Special materials were required for creation. Raul was stunned as he read it. He realized that skill book creation meant he could turn all the skills he had acquired into skill book. He immediately understood how overwhelmingly powerful and unbalanced that ability was. Ravel proudly remarked that he had done well to listen to her. Raul asked her how she felt and whether she noticed any changes. Ravel replied that her body shape and wings had become more distinct. She explained that once the seal was completely broken, she might be partially freed from the binding spell. Raul congratulated her and sincerely hoped that day would come soon. However, inwardly, he realized that when that time came, she would escape her soul state and regain her real body. When that happened, he would have to say goodbye to the companion who had stayed by his side for so long. He understood that everything from that moment onward would be different. As the connected world truly began, his life would change completely. Although the main branches of the scenario would remain the same, he knew he had to move more cautiously. Still, he would not hesitate because he trusted his own strength more than anyone else. The scene then shifted to the northwestern barrier of the continent. Several knights moved carefully through a dungeon, unaware that a wolf monster was sneaking toward them. Suddenly, one man noticed it, unshaved his sword instantly, and killed the monster in a single strike. That man was Lawrence D. Ashton, the second son of House Ashton. The knight he saved thanked him respectfully. Lawrence calmly warned him to remain careful, explaining that there were far more monsters than during their last expedition. As he moved forward, Lawrence reflected on the situation. Beyond the barrier, past the Canyon of Despair that connected to Corpse Road, an enormous number of monsters and undead were invading from the restricted mountain range. This had been happening for a long time. Even after clearing the hordes, they would return as undead. Exhausted by the endless war of attrition, headquarters had formed an expedition team to investigate. Recently, they discovered that dimensional gates had appeared there as well. Dungeonization had accelerated, causing monsters to multiply rapidly and creating a vicious cycle. The only solution was to block all dungeon entrances beyond the barrier. Lawrence informed the knights that failure would result in the barrier's collapse. One knight added that according to the mages, the dungeon spaces themselves had changed. Lawrence agreed and explained that decades of accumulated information had become useless. However, this was the last candidate location. If everything went smoothly, they could complete the mission and return within 3 days. The knights expressed relief and exhaustion. One of them mentioned wanting to send a letter home, knowing his family must be worried. Suddenly, red eyes appeared in the darkness. Bats flew toward them, and the dungeon began to tremble. Lawrence rushed ahead and froze in shock. 3 dark gates stood before him, and from them poured countless zombies, undead and demonic monsters. The knights trembled in fear, believing it was the end. Lawrence shouted at them to regain their composure and ordered them to escape immediately and report to the barrier. Nearby stood 2 figures. One was the necromancer holding a wand topped with a human skull. Beside him stood the warrior, gripping a long sword. Necromancer expressed amusement at Lawrence's composure and mockingly offered him the honor of serving his majesty as an undead. Ignoring the provocation, Lawrence ordered his knights to flee. As they ran, the necromancer cast a spell, summoning more undead from the ground to block their escape. Lawrence immediately charged forward, cutting down the undead with his sword technique to clear a path. Watching this, the necromancer smiled with interest and recognized the technique, realizing that Lawrence belonged to House Ashton. Some time later, at the barrier, the knights stationed on gate guard duty saw 3 knights rushing toward them, completely out of breath. Alarmed by their condition, the guard knights immediately asked what had happened. One of the escaped knights urgently replied that they needed to inform the commander-in-chief immediately about Captain Lawrence. Without delay, they were escorted to the commander-in-chief's office, where they reported everything that had happened earlier. After hearing the report, the commander-in-chief immediately wrote a formal message and sent it by carrier pigeon to Count Melvin Ashton, Lawrence's father. Upon receiving the report, Count Melvin Ashton summoned both Raul and Dylan. He read the contents aloud before them. Raul's expression darkened as he listened. Without saying a word, he returned to his room and shut the door behind him. The moment he was alone, his strength left him and he collapsed to the ground. His mind raced as he realized that the scenario related to the restricted area was progressing much faster than he had expected. He recalled the earlier warning window from the system. It had informed him that he had received the system-imposed force, karmic retribution, for forcibly interfering with a mandatory scenario. The warning had told him to be cautious, that misfortune could befall him at any time and in any form. As Raul remembered those words, he realized that this must be the misfortune the system had warned him about. He acknowledged that he bore some responsibility for the anomaly. He should have prepared for the consequences somehow, but he had failed to consider Brother Lawrence. He called out to his contracted fairy Ravel. She immediately responded, asking what he needed. Raul studied himself. He knew he did not have time for regret or hesitation. He had already made his decision. He would trust in his strength and move forward. He asked Ravel if she could contact the guild chat for him, explaining that he needed to prepare to enter the restricted area. Some time later, Raul arrived at the northwestern barrier of the continent with a small group of his knights. Julius, the commander-in-chief of the Iron Wall Knights, welcomed him and remarked that he had arrived sooner than expected, adding that he must be tired from his long journey. Raul replied respectfully that it was an honor to meet a legendary warrior like Commander Julius. Nearby, Josh turned to Jake and whispered that Julius looked more like a friendly neighborhood elder than a legendary commander. Jake, a veteran of barrier duty who had joined Raul's knight order, remained silent. Meanwhile, Raul observed Julius. He realized that what made the man truly impressive was that, despite reaching the Master Realm, he did not emit any aura whatsoever. That meant he had perfect control over his power. Julius then asked if Raul had come to request permission to conduct a search. Raul confirmed that he had and asked for permission to venture beyond the barrier. Julius asked if Raul was aware of the current situation at Corpse Road. Raul replied that he had heard about the severe losses caused by the Empire's undead and the monsters from the restricted area, which had made search operations impossible. Julius agreed, saying he was pleased that a rising star like Raul had come to help while they were tied down by those creatures. However, he warned that Raul's group was dangerously small and questioned whether the mission was too risky. Josh immediately responded with confidence, saying they had completed even more difficult missions before. Kane added that the undead were drawn to human vitality, and moving in larger groups would only increase the danger. After thinking for a moment, Julius granted permission for Raul and his knights to cross beyond the barrier. However, he warned them to return as quickly as possible, as the movements of the surrounding monsters had become increasingly concerning. In the worst case, they might be forced to seal the passages to the restricted area. Raul acknowledged the warning. Julius then added one more important piece of information. He explained that barrier stones throughout the restricted area suppressed magical energy. The Empire was likely searching for these locations to open gates more effectively. Until then, they would probably keep Lawrence alive as a prisoner. He apologized, saying that was all the advice he could offer. Raul thanked him sincerely, saying the information had been more than helpful. A short while later, the massive gate in the barrier began to open. As Raul and his knights prepared to enter, Josh remarked that it would have been helpful to have the alchemist with them. Raul explained that he had assigned Nikia a separate task so she could not join them. Their destination was the Formica dungeon, where Lawrence had last been headed. Other teams would search the surrounding areas and secure their retreat path. They stood before the magical barrier covering the restricted area. After a moment, a pathway opened through the shimmering energy. Julius wished them luck. Raul stepped forward and passed through the opening, silently, praying that his brother would hold on a little longer. He vowed that he would rescue him. Meanwhile, inside the dungeon, Lawrence fought desperately. He cut down one undead after another with his sword, but exhaustion was beginning to take its toll. His body trembled as his strength slowly faded. Watching him struggle, the Imperial necromancer McClanahan laughed mockingly, saying that for someone from House Ashton, he was quite disappointing. He urged Lawrence to try harder as he summoned even more undead. Beside him, the warrior Ezekiel told McClanahan to stop wasting time and complete his mission. McClanahan replied that he had been having so much fun that he had forgotten his duty. He glanced toward two mages working nearby on a magic circle and asked about their progress. One of the mages reported that the barrier stones in the area were interfering with the gate signals. The two gates on the left and right were ready to transmit once a signal arrived, but the remaining one could not be opened. McClanahan acknowledged the problem, explaining that, unlike the demons that had appeared without titles before, this one was the real deal. Ezekiel asked what he intended to do. McClanahan replied that for His Majesty's sake, they had no choice but to blow up the entire area. Hearing this, Lawrence was shocked. He immediately realized the consequences. If such chaos erupted, the monsters created by the gates would head straight for the barrier. If undead, demons, and monsters all attacked at once, The current forces defending the barrier would not be able to withstand the wave. Despite his exhaustion, Lawrence forced himself into a fighting stance. He resolved that even if it cost him his life, he would stop them. Later, Lawrence was seen kneeling on the ground, taking deep, ragged breaths. He was surrounded by the undead forces. McClanahan mocked him, wondering where all his earlier confidence had gone. He taunted Lawrence, asking if he was already exhausted and whether his determination to protect the barrier had amounted to nothing. He added that even the famed Silver Zero had become a toothless dog, remarking that House Ashton had been praised so highly, yet Lawrence was nothing but a disappointment. Lawrence silently reflected on his condition. He had been fighting continuously for days without a single bite to eat. He realized that he had truly reached his limit. He no longer had the strength even to stand. As one of the undead rushed forward to finish him, Lawrence closed his eyes and accepted his fate. In his heart, he bid farewell to his father and his brothers, believing that this was the end for him. However, just before the undead could reach him, a high-speed arrow shot through the air and pierced the undead's neck. The creature let out a horrible scream before collapsing. McClanahan was shocked and confused when he realized that the one who had fired the arrow was the leader of the dungeon monsters. The dungeon leader shouted angrily at the intruders, declaring that they would pay for their sins. At his command, the monster warriors charged forward and began attacking the undead forces. Lawrence stared at the scene in confusion, unable to understand what was happening. A short while later, Raul and his knights arrived at the battlefield. When they saw the monsters fighting against McClanahan's undead army, they were equally confused. Raul wondered what was happening. He had used the haste buff to rush to the Formica dungeon, but he had never expected to see such a situation. After observing the battle for a moment, Raul informed his knights that the monsters were fighting the undead. Kane questioned how such a thing was possible. Raul admitted that even seeing it with his own eyes, it was hard to believe. He then opened his system window, which displayed a warning. A force scenario was currently active in the area. The main quest was titled Defend the Forbidden Zone. Its description explained that the barrier suppressing the dimensional gate was under threat from intruders. The objective was to repel the intruders and protect the seal to prevent the gate from opening. Rewards would be distributed based on achievement level. However, there was also a warning that the enemies present were excessively powerful for players to face and that retreat was strongly advised. After reading the information, Raul was stunned. Even though he was level 99 and at the highest tier of expert, the system was advising him to retreat. He wondered what kind of enemies could warrant such a warning. At that moment, Josh spotted Lawrence in the middle of the battlefield and urgently pointed him out. Seeing his brother, Raul's expression immediately filled with tension. Without hesitation, he rushed forward with his knights. He ordered them to assist the monsters, declaring that stopping the gate was their top priority. He activated his skill, Radiant Aura. A pair of golden wings appeared on his back as he descended onto the battlefield. A wave of golden energy spread across the ground, and the nearby undead were instantly destroyed upon contact. Kane slipped behind one of the enemy mages and struck him down. Josh used his sword techniques to defeat two enemies at once. Meanwhile, Pierce, positioned on a cliff above, located his target. Using his sniping skill, he fired a high-speed arrow that struck and destroyed one of the mag's magic circles. McClanahan gritted his teeth in fury and demanded to know who had dared interfere. Lawrence also turned and saw Raul approaching with a strange, radiant technique. Raul landed in front of him and smiled. He told Lawrence that he had come to save him. Lawrence was shocked by Raul's changed appearance and strength. He hesitated before asking if it was really him. Around them, the battle continued as the monsters and Raul's knights fought fiercely against the undead. Raul asked Lawrence why the Naga monsters were fighting the undead. Lawrence explained that the monsters had their own reasons. The Empire was trying to blow up the entire area to destroy the ward stones installed throughout the Forbidden Zone. However, the Naga's home base was located there as well. They were fighting to protect their territory. Raul realized that it was essentially a temporary alliance against a common enemy. Lawrence confirmed this and added that he had survived several deadly situations thanks to the Naga. He then pointed toward Ezekiel and warned Raul that the Imperial commander was at least master level. Judging by the mana he emitted, Raul was alarmed. He understood now why the system had issued such a severe warning. Master-level forces had been deployed deep within the Forbidden Zone. Lawrence told him that even without Ezekiel actively joining the battle yet, the situation was already dire. He appreciated Raul coming to help, but he urged him to retreat and bring reinforcements. Raul refused. He declared that he could not leave his brother behind. Lawrence reminded him that the enemy was a master, someone on a completely different level from upper-tier experts. He warned that without someone capable of dealing with such an opponent, their current numbers would not be enough. Raul calmly replied that there was someone capable of facing a master. He revealed that he had brought along someone who knew sword masters very well. Lawrence immediately looked around nervously, wondering who it could be. Raul then glanced at his Regnitor armor. He declared that the time had come. He called out respectfully, asking his master to reveal his true power. As he spoke, a golden aura began flowing from his body into the armor.